Hello there, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I have a video that I made for a Punched Out Thursday to Die for. And in this collaboration, we use our punches and our dies to create scrapbooking layouts. In the description box, you'll find links to the channels of Ronnie Sue, Kathy, Dorothy, Rebecca, and Sonia, who also create videos for a Punched Out Thursday to Die for. And I feel so honored to be part of this group of very talented scrapbookers, and I just know you'll love their videos, so look in the description box and you could check them all out. Today I'm making a Christmas layout using the Blue Fern Studios Christmas Cheer collection. I used this collection 2 weeks ago and I punched out a whole bunch of diamonds, and I punched out way too many. So over the past 2 weeks, I was trying to think of how I could use up some of these diamonds, and I came up with this idea. I tore the paper on a diagonal on two corners of a sheet of paper, and then I'm using the diamonds to fill in the area that I ripped away. I also put down some blue pattern paper, and I really wanted that edge to be very distressed and very torn, so I used my fingers and I really got in there and I roughed it up a whole bunch. And then I did the exact same thing on the other side. I wanted there to be a little bit more of a definition between the two areas, so I took a piece of this dark green paper and I added that to the border between the two areas of the layout. And I think that helps to separate it a little bit. And I'm doing the same thing here. I roughed it up with my scissors, and then I went in there and I really roughed it up with my fingers. And then as I was doing that, I started to kind of push back and roll back the larger piece of pattern paper a little bit more. And I had in mind that the paper was torn and kind of revealing what was behind it. So that was why I wanted the paper to look very distressed. And then I do the exact same thing on the other side. I cut a piece of the darker green paper and I further distress the paper that's already in the background, and I distress the green paper as well. And I do cut a little bit out of the green paper so that the curve of the paper follows the curve of the large piece of pattern paper in the background. So once I get the papers arranged the way I want them, I add a little bit more adhesive to hold everything together, and then I trim back that green paper. Even though I wanted the paper to be very distressed, I just felt that those pieces of paper were getting a little bit too long, the torn pieces, so I trimmed them back a little bit, and then I wanted the edges to be distressed, of course, so I used scissors and I roughed up the edges once again. So now I'm finally happy with the way that looks. I am going to use this photo. This is a photo of my two daughters and my two nieces and my nephew on Christmas Eve. We always take a picture of the cousins on Christmas Eve and any holiday that everybody's together. I put some adhesive on the back of that large piece of pattern paper and I attach that down. I'm going to back the photo with some of this pretty green paper, and I think that it'll make the photo a little bit more prominent. And I'm just adding a tiny piece of paper on the torn area on the bottom. And then I use some Distress Oxide in Mowed Lawn, and I ink the edges of the paper. And I not only ink the edges of the green pattern paper, but also of the white cardstock. And then I go in and I ink the edges of all of those torn pieces of paper as well. Normally when I ink something that's already on the page, I make a mess, but it just so happened that on this layout, I was able to keep the ink just on the edges of the paper. Of course, it would have been better if I had thought to do this before I attached all the papers down, but once I inked the edges on the photo, I wanted to ink the edges on the torn paper as well. Now I'm attaching my photo down to the green paper. And now I'm going to make some Christmas trees. The Blue Fern Studios collection came with some ephemera. I think I actually got that in a My Creative Scrapbook kit. And I really like this collection, but none of the ephemera really seemed to go with this layout. So I decided that I was going to make some trees. I'm using all of the leftover pieces of paper. Most of these are the branding strip on the bottom of the pattern paper. and I'm using my scissors and I'm distressing the edges of all of these probably 1/2 inch strips of paper. And now I'm going back in with some distress oxide and I'm using rustic wilderness and forest moss. I made some triangles on regular white cardstock in the shape of a tree, and I just started layering those strips of paper on top of each other, starting at the bottom and then going up to the top. If I had wider strips of paper, then I could have used a border punch and punched out some fancy edges. But since I had so many of these very thin pieces of paper, I thought that I would use these up. I continue this process and I make, I believe, 6 trees. And it really doesn't take long to do this. And I really like the impacts that it gives to the layout. And I just keep using those little scraps that I cut off the edge and I layer them back on top of the trees. And a few strips go a very long way for making these embellishments. And these trees are reminding me of my dilemma with my Christmas tree at home. We have 3 dogs, and even though they're adult dogs, they do tend to chew on things. And so we really can't put our Christmas tree upstairs. And then downstairs, we used to have a little bit more open space, but we bought a desk and another piece of furniture downstairs, and we could fit a Christmas tree down there, but there's really no great place for a Christmas tree. So we might have to go with one of those smaller Christmas trees this year. I really hate to not have the Christmas tree in the house this time of year. So we'll have to figure that out. But these Christmas trees will be decorated in a little while. So I ink the edges of the trees. I think that's really important so that they'll stand out from the background. The background is kind of neutral, but it's still a pattern paper. So I think that inking the edges helps everything be more defined. This is going to be my title. This says Joy, 3 little banners that spell out joy. And this was from the Blue Fern Studios ephemera pack. And I just found this little scrap of paper. It's not from this collection, but I thought that it went really well with the red in this collection. So I mounted each of the banners on the red paper and I inked the edges. And again, I think that this will help it stand out from the background. I put another layer of paper behind my photo. This time I used a red piece of paper. And now I'm going to pop up my photo using some foam. I put a large piece of foam on the background, but I end up having to take a lot of the foam on the right-hand side away because the photo's resting on those trees and that pops the right-hand side up a little and then it's popped up too far because of all the trees. I also use a die, it's over to the right, and that's an LDRS die, and I really like that large scallop, and that piece fits perfectly underneath the photo. So now I'm figuring out where I want to put those trees in the background. I know I want to have a cluster off to the right, and then I'm going to have a smaller cluster on the left-hand side of the photo, and I want the trees on the right-hand side to be a little bit higher, and then the trees on the left to be a little bit lower, and that kind of goes along with the way the paper is flowing. I attach the large scallop underneath the photo, and now I'm adding the title. I had added some foam to the back of each of those letters just to make it pop up a little bit. And now I'm using some Paper Studio poinsettias, and I just add those 3 flowers to the layout. But of course, I don't like to add flowers without adding any greenery, so I'm adding some pine needles behind the poinsettias. And the die that I'm using is a Sizzix die. I don't know what collection it's from. I just see that on the back of one of the dies it says Sizzix. So I'm just putting a couple of these pine branches behind each of the poinsettias. And then later on I decided to add more. And so I went back and I cut more branches out of a different color green and I add those to each of the poinsettias. And you'll see that in the final layout at the end of the video. I also added some photo corners to my layout, something that I absolutely love to do. At first, I was thinking that I wanted them to be red, and then when I flipped the photo corners over, I preferred the pattern paper that was on the other side. So I inked the edges of each of the photo corners, and then I attached them down to the photo. Where the diamonds meet, I wanted to add something. So I was thinking that these really, really tiny pearls would be a good idea. Last time I used the diamonds, I added some pearls and they were a little bit too big. So this time I wanted to go with something very small. So I'm using some really, really tiny pearls. These are from Want to Scrap. And I put a little bit of glue down because I was worried that some of them would fall off if I just used the adhesive that was on the pearls. And then once I had all those little tiny pearls attached down, I added some stars to the tops of each of my trees. I used red stars and gold stars. And I had some yellowish gold stars, but then I realized that I had some gold stars that were more of a true gold color rather than yellow. So I decided to go with those stars because I was thinking of using some of the same color jewels on the Christmas trees. And I'm also going to use them on the photo corners. And then I use the same jewels and I begin to decorate the Christmas trees. There are only two different sizes, so I am generally putting the smaller jewels on the top and the bigger ones on the bottom, but I do add a couple of the small ones throughout the trees. So I was thinking that since I'm adding so many jewels to the trees, that I should also add some jewels to the title. So I start by adding some really tiny red pearls. In a moment, I'll add those to the bottom of the word joy. And then I also take some jewels. You could see them off to the left. I only have a couple left, so I add some gold jewels to the top of the letters as well. And that's the last touch on this layout. Here are some close-ups. I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and I always hope that I am giving somebody some ideas for their own scrapbooking layouts. I hope that you will take a look in the description box and check out all the other videos of all the other ladies who are part of this collaboration. And I will see you again next Thursday for another A Punched Out Thursday to Die For. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.